I almost took my life on Monday. Somehow I was able to do a couple interviews this week, and I fixed the toilet. Now it's time to talk about a band that I was deeply in love with, then fell out of, and now I'm trying to figure out where I am with the band, with Periphery. Am I doing this backwards marathon just because the new album, Periphery V, is coming out this Friday? Somewhat. Am I also doing this list to reflect back on what I liked about the band in the past? You betcha. Am I also doing this because I know a lot of people did not like that I did a Killswitch Engage one last week? Oh yes, that is definitely why. But overall, yeah, Periphery is a band that, back when they first started, they were everything I was looking for in a band. And then I kind of fell out of them. Since then, they've released some good albums. But now I listen back to everything here, and I want to see where everything still stands when it comes to my ranking of the band Periphery. Love that shit. So, started off with P1, Periphery 1, and this is mainly a Misha Mansour solo album under the name of Periphery. It's almost all of his tracks. Spencer Sotelo does the vocals, of course. I mean, the whole band does what they normally do, with the exception that the drums are done by a drum machine. I still feel like some of these are the greatest songs that the band has ever put out. I have such a connection to this album because I was looking for something different when this came out in 2010, and I was so happy that it did eventually come out. It was super heavy, it had that great Meshuggah feel to it. It feels like they were trying to take what Meshuggah did, but able to put their own spin on it with clean melodic vocals in the choruses, of course the harsh vocals when necessary. Still very proggy because I was deep, hard into my prog phase going on there. This is when I started hearing about that onomatopoeia called gent, which of course we'll be talking about at the end of this video. But when it comes right down to everything, I still feel like this is one of the best albums they've ever made. It's not perfect, and I wish it had the whole band on it, but it does some of the best songs that they have, and I'm gonna give it an A. Periphery 2. This time, it's personal. This, I think, potentially, is the best Periphery album. It is everything that I loved about the first Periphery album, but with the full band, some fantastic guest solos. I mean, John Petrucci of Dream Theater contributed to this, and he just doesn't contribute to anything. He's gotta like the music. And I love the fact that they were able to get him attached to this. When it gets heavy, they get heavier. When they get more melodic, they get more melodic. And this is almost peak Periphery love. I mean, the band was like, everyone was loving the band at this point, unless you really hated them and have always hated them. This, I feel like, is the band at their peak performance, and I love everything that happened with this album. I think I do have to, at least of the Periphery discography so far, I have to give it an S. Juggernaut, Alpha and Omega, my least favorite of the Periphery albums. And hold on one second, I just noticed something wrong with this graph. There we go, I didn't realize that someone was being a little saucy when they came to the ranking system because I need to give this fair grades. Juggernaut, I feel, is overrated. I feel like it was done just to make the fans happy because they had the idea. The fact that they had to scrap it so many times and then they felt like it was an obligation to the fan base to make this. And then when I listen to it, it just feels like a bunch of songs that just don't hold up. It's probably my least favorite, musically speaking, favorite Periphery release. And that's so funny because it's a double disc concept album. And I still just don't hold it in that high of regard. Maybe I'm just not a prog fan. I mean, I am, but, you know, there's different waves of it. I don't think it's fair to give this a D, necessarily. But I am going to give it a D. I can't wait to see the comments on that one. Periphery 3, Select Difficulty. Probably the most misunderstood Periphery album, at least the way that I feel about it. It is good. There's some really good songs on here, but this also does have that feeling of we need to get out of our contract feel behind it. And if you look back at your favorite bands and you notice that they switched labels at one point, they do have an album where it feels like they're just writing songs to get out of their contract. And this is one of them. Sometimes it's a covers album, sometimes it's a live album, Sometimes it's a best of or greatest hits album. Those are done to get out of contracts. They are not done just for the money. It is because they are going bye-bye to their labels. And that's how I feel about Select Difficulty. And I feel like them writing this album was the difficulty of very hard. And it's not an album that I really go back to, and I'm not sure if I will again. Maybe. Of course, I'm not the biggest Periphery fan anymore. I still enjoy what they do, at least the albums that I do enjoy, but this is just another one that doesn't really hit home for me. It does hit harder than Juggernaut. I'm giving that a C. Periphery IV, Hail Stan. This is the most refreshing Periphery album to date, at least to the point of the fourth album. This is when they started their own label. They realized that they weren't necessarily going to be able to live off the band forever, and they were able to treat this band like something that they wanted to make again. And that's something that a lot of bands lose sight of, and there's a lot of bands that never get back to those glory days because they feel like they have an obligation to their label, or they feel like they have an obligation to their fans to stick to one particular style, and this album is a giant FU to that idea. I mean, what modern band nowadays of what you could consider to be a progressive metalcore band, maybe that's the way you should describe it? I think it works more than anything, although the last two albums are much more in the prog territory. Hail Stan starts with a nearly 17-minute long song. What other kind of band of this genre would ever attempt such a thing, unless they're trying to give a gigantic FU to their former labels and to be able to show that they want to be able to create the music that they want to make? That's what's done here in strides. And some of my favorite songs are off of this album as well too. Church Burner, I love the fact that they added a little bit of black metal influence in here. I mean, there's so many different directions that you could look at this album from, and it feels like it's the real first pure Periphery album since P2, and it feels like it's the first proper prog album the band has ever put out. While not perfect, and I wouldn't say there's anything particularly bad about this, I think it is right in the middle for me, and I'm going to give it a B. And finally, P5, and probably the most apt name that they've ever given an album, Gent is not a genre. I have not heard this album nearly enough. I have given it a couple spins. That is just because as of writing this, I just got the album today, and I've given it 2 full proper spins. I really love what I hear. This feels like they took everything from Hail Stan, but they were able to progress upon that. They were able to take ideas that they wanted to take and be able to flourish it just a little bit more. I mean, you have classic jazz on this album, you have plenty of blast beats on this album, classic Periphery, you have mid-era Periphery, you have latter-day Periphery. It feels like it's the most Periphery album ever. Like, it's the one album where it feels like there was 0 restrictions. This is the album that they've wanted to make for a very, very long time. And I love the fact that there is not one song shorter than 5 minutes and 17 seconds on this album. There are multiple songs over the 10-minute mark, if not longer. And they have some really good doozies on this album as well. One of my personal favorites is the song Dying Star, which I don't know if that's a single, but it should be released as a single, or at least played live. Thanks Nobu is probably their best song over 10 minutes long. I'm really excited for people to be able to check that out on Friday. There's so much good going on with this release. It's great in a sense that Periphery had like that peak mountaintop moment and a little bit of a fall, because they were able to catch themselves from that fall and be able to start creating the music that they've always wanted to make, rather than what at least feels like the music that they had to either chase the trends or make their labels happy or just make the most money possible. With Periphery 4 and 5, they've really come into their own for the type of music that they want to make. And again, while not a perfect album, and this is probably an album that arguably could make my top albums of 2023, I do feel like there's a lot of other albums that could potentially beat it, especially with some outside things with the band that kind of make me still... Should I like them? Should I not support them anymore? I don't know the full details, and I don't need to get into them here. But all of that said, if I look at this from a proper perspective of audio form, I do have to give this album in the Periphery discography an A. And considering there isn't really anything to change, I don't need to snap my fingers. Even though I just did. It's already ranked in order. So starting at D is Juggernaut, followed by Periphery 3, Select Difficulty, followed by Periphery 4, Hail Stan. In the A tier, you got Periphery 5, Gent is Not Genre, followed by Periphery 1, and in the S tier, my favorite Periphery album, Periphery 2, this time, it's personal. And thank you very much for checking out my backwards marathon on Periphery. If you like this, tell me why. If you didn't like it, and I'm guessing you don't, also tell me why in the comments below. And, rank these albums for yourselves. Let's see what you got. And until my next backwards marathon, interview, review, top 10, or any other kind of video I make here for the Heavy Debriefings YouTube channel, this is Josh Runquist saying, see ya.